start the recording. So VFX Pipeline week 1. So this is kind of exciting. And the other thing I wanted to, following on from all of that, is some groups are kind of chatty, some groups aren't chatty, some groups like to keep their cameras on, some groups, I kind of feel like it's drawing the curtains. They kind of go, whoops, draw the curtain on their house. Personally, I quite like seeing what you look like. I've got some students, I have no idea what they look like. But that's a personal thing. And it's funny how I kind of get intrigued by the personalities of the group. So, you know, I kind of would encourage you to jump in and interrupt. Please do. I kind of like that. It gives me something to respond to, as long as it's obviously relevant. I do get people just sort of start talking about random things, which is a bit weird and a bit annoying. But you know, I love being interrupted with questions, or you know, it might spark off something that you can add to the conversation, and I'd really encourage that. You know, otherwise it just feels like it's a bit like you're just sitting at home kind of watching sort of the world's dullest television. So please ask me questions as we go. Okay, so I'll give you, I always like to start off with a bit of an overview and let you know how the class is going to run, and then also how the trimester is going to run. So we're going to give you a bit of an introduction to the trimester, the subject, a bit of an overview. I always like to give you really kind of bring up the assessment briefs as often as we can, just so we can iron out any questions or thoughts that people might have about the assessment brief. People get you know, obviously quite involved in the brief, as you'd imagine. Talk about, you know, the expectations and the purpose of the subject. Introduce you to the unit outlines, which is basically our roadmap that keeps us on track and lets us know where we're going and where we, you know, sort of an expectation of where we're going to be. Talk about the due dates. I'm going to sort of talk about what is a pipeline, an introduction to the concept of a production pipeline, an overview of that, the purpose of it, why do we have it. We're going to talk about the differences and also the similarities between film and game pipelines. There's some distinct similarities and also some quite polar opposites in how they work. And then we'll talk about the principal phases of it. So I won't lie to you. Production VFX Pipeline can be a little dry, but somehow we've managed to bring it alive. I'm always kind of amazed. How was that? Was that boring? And they go, no, it wasn't. It was really good. So far it's been really good. And I've tried, you know, some of my slides can be a bit wordy, but we'll break away from that, and we can just bring into it what you need, and that's where I really, you know, I think I really enjoy your feedback and interaction with all of that. So apologies, I'm going to do the thing that they always sort of tell you not to do. I'm going to read from a really boring bit of slide. So Visual Effects Pipeline is a multifaceted and often quite intricate setup that's used by digital studios for the purpose of creating a workflow efficiency within interconnected teams. And we're going to break it down into each element from, you know, all the way from storyboard through conceptual stages, pre-visualization to animation to final compositing. And each step serves as a specific function in the producing digital media of all varieties, and it's been refined over its history to best create the visual media quickly, efficiently, and more importantly, economically. And we get into that. That sort of ties into why we have pipelines in the first place. And right from the sort of the birth of film, there's always been pipelines. And they found that that's the way to make things really efficient and stick to deadlines. So students in this unit, and this is all taken out of your unit outline, I'd just like to go through it right in the beginning of the subject. So students in this unit will study each area before choosing a specific domain to analyse and explore its purpose in the 3D production pipeline. So this was effectively inform you lot about what areas you might like to take into for future study and provide a visual context to creating digital media artwork. Okay, so you'll understand the foundational layers of IT infrastructure, software development practices, deployment policies, etc. That it really is quite boring, so I'll leave it at that. Our learning outcomes, and the learning outcomes are the thing that I sort of kind of need to go through, because at any, again, this is kind of the cornerstone of the whole thing of how we build the course. This is the thing that we put together and submit to TEXA, who is essentially the accrediting government body. And this is the thing that, the promise. We say, upon completion of this unit, the student will be able to describe a standard production pipeline for film and VFX, identify the steps required in production pipelines, describe a pipeline step and its relevance to overall pipelines, recall a pipeline step with reference to an existing film or television production, and recall roles of personnel in production pipelines. This will make a lot more sense, and it does get a little bit more interesting than this. Okay, this is where it gets exciting, because you guys are blessed in many ways because you're the third iteration of this subject. That means this is the third time I've delivered it. First time you get it mostly right, second time you polish it. And we listen to a lot of your feedback. Your feedback, and we ask you for your feedback constantly, gets really kind of, we respond to it. And being the kind of college we are, and this is one of the things why I really like working for someone like Collards, because I've worked for similar organisations and I've worked for an organisation that was considerably bigger. What I love about this size place is you can respond really nimbly. So last trimester, the students said to me they felt really overwhelmed with the volume of work that we were giving them. And I went, okay. So what I've been able to do is, you normally would have 3 assessments, and whilst I don't want to sort of shortchange you and not give you enough kind of content and goodness, but I also don't want to break your soul with too many things to do. And I also realise that possibly the funner stuff would be the practical units that you do with CG Spectrum. So the making stuff and the animating stuff and getting your hands dirty, getting yourself covered in pixels. Whilst I would love to think that you've signed up because you really want to write essays for me, I suspect that's not really the case. But you're going to have fun anyway. People do actually enjoy it. So I've taken out 2 assessments, and I've taken the main assessment and I've stretched it out over the 12 weeks. Yay. That's a good thing. You should be really happy about that. And you can when you start talking to the other guys, you say, oh, you guys had to do 3 assessments, we only had to do 1. And then they'll hate you and me. And the way I've done that is I mentioned the quite dry learning outcomes, these things here. Our assessments need to map into those. So I quite cunningly realized I could make the main assessment stretch over that. So, and I'll go through what those are. So each stage, step 1, step 2, and are what I call WIP stages, work in progress stages, and then we get and the final assessment gets completed off the back of those. So I'll get into the first assessment. Well, really, it's the whole assessment. So essentially, in a nutshell, what I'm asking you to do is to write a report or an assignment or an essay, whatever terminology you want to use, about an animation or visual effects film that intrigues you in some way. It might be a contemporary film, it might be one that's literally just come out, or it might be something that is significant in some way, that maybe it's the thing that that's brought you here. Maybe it's the film that you went, oh, you know, this is the thing that's for me. So it gives you an opportunity to really kind of research in a bit of depth how they made that film. And so, oops. What I'm calling it is a case study, or I've used the term VFX breakdown. The reason I put that term in there is because if you want to search any of this stuff, the term VFX breakdown generally yields quite good results on the internet. So I'll read through this. Assessment 1 is the first stage of a much larger report on the VFX production pipeline of an existing production. Approach this assessment as a case study or VFX breakdown of a film production that you have recently seen and been inspired by. So yes, I would expect you to have watched it, and I would expect you to have watched it maybe for the millionth time recently, but certainly you're going to have to go out and see this film. Consider how the pipeline for this production is in some way uniquely designed to tackle specific cinematic challenges. You may wish to narrow your focus in on a specific role or step of the pipeline that you're intending to specialize in yourself. So if you want to be an animator, you might like to think about how that pipeline was put together and particularly focus in on the animation aspects. The information's all out there. It really is. In fact, that's why the internet was invented, was for doing this assignment, basically. So while this is primarily a... Okay, someone's getting text messages, which is a little bit annoying. Whilst this is primarily a written report, you may wish to use images to add further clarity to your assessment. You know what? Don't just bust out Word and go typey, typey, typey. You know, you're visual people. Make this interesting. You know, yes, I know I'm showing you no images at this point, but that will change. You know, you know, we're visual people, so, you know, just make it more of a presentation than just a standard kind of, you know, word-based uni assignment. You know, and you know, you might, for instance, if there's a particular scene in the film that is relevant, go and find a YouTube link and put that in there. You know, that quite often people write about films that I haven't seen, or I haven't seen recently, or I need to be reminded of. And so writing these assessments generally takes me ages, because I tend to fall down a rabbit hole of going and watching lots of YouTube clips about whatever film that you've written about, which is great. But, you know, save me searching for them. Perhaps you might want to spice up your assignment by putting those links in there. So it makes it a little bit more interactive. So if you're talking about a particular animated scene or a particular visual effect, you might want to throw that into your assignment. So this is a WIP stage, work in progress. So as such, you'll receive feedback that you'll be expected to respond to. The WIP stage 2 and final completion is dependent on the groundwork that you put in here. So effectively, this is a planning stage. I'm not expecting anything particularly polished. It's literally giving me an indication of where you're going. So what that looks like is a little bit flexible. And I imagine every single one of you will do something kind of slightly different. Like I said, this is, I've reworked the original assessment. And so what I really like is the fact that you aren't just handing me something at the end of the trimester and go, is this what you wanted? We actually get to sort of have a discussion and go, oh yeah, I like where you're going with this, or you know, maybe I've got some thoughts and some other input that I might want to put into it. We can have a chat about it, and so that you can essentially craft a much better piece. One, you've got a much reduced workload, but it's spread out over a greater period of time, and you have two opportunities, at least two opportunities for feedback, and that's really good. Learners should demonstrate an understanding of standard production pipelines for film and visual effects. I'm obviously taking all of this from the unit outline. You need to be able to identify the steps required in the production pipeline, explain the roles and responsibilities of the personnel chain in the production pipeline. So I'll give you a little bit of context. In the previous iteration of this subject, I used to ask the students to describe a VFX pipeline. And they always felt that it was a bit of a trick question, because in the first part of this course, this subject, I basically do that for them. And it was kind of funny, because I'd be doing it thinking, well, I've sort of done the assignment for you, so you could kind of just hand it back to me and it'd be kind of right. And I think it confused people, because they're going, what does he mean? He's already done that. I can't hand him back the work he's already done for us. And that was, I'd be really blunt. I'd go, you know what? If you read through my notes and picked through them, you could rejig it and hand it back to me, and that would be the assignment done perfectly. And for some reason, no one really quite got that. They were like, I think it's a trick. He is a bit sneaky. That's surely not what he means, and it used to confuse them. So that's essential. But I kind of am sort of alluding to it here when I say you need to be able to understand what a VFX pipeline is, and I definitely go through it, so you'll see all of that. Okay, the old rubric. Academics love a rubric, and so I've got lots of I spent quite a bit of time crafting this rubric, so there's lots of language in here that might allude to what I'm looking for, you know, things like clarity of written and visual communication, attention to grammar, punctuation and literacy, all of that stuff, you know. And then at what level do you does not meet the minimum, meets the minimum standard, moves beyond the minimum standard, exceeds the minimum standard, exceeds well beyond the minimum standard, blah, blah, blah. Demonstrated knowledge and understanding of the subject, and then how well you demonstrate that. Effective research skills, professionalism, referencing, conventions, positive, this is one of my favorite lines. I've been using this line for a long time. Positive contribution to class in the form of attendance and discussion and interaction. So I know attendance isn't compulsory. I've got a student that I've probably only ever seen once in class, but that student communicates and interacts with me a lot. She'll write me emails. She sends me text. I got a text message off her today saying that she was watching the recording while on her commute, and she had a question about it. And I got a text message from her. The modern world, it's amazing. So that's what I mean. So I kind of know that student is interacting with me, even though I never see her in class. So it's a kind of a really cool thing. So I quite like that little thing that I put in there. So what I mean by that is use the Facebook group. There's a discussion board. Almost university students never use the discussion board, but you'll notice I will quite often put things in the discussion board. So always look to see if I have. Managing your expectations. Do you know what? You know, that whole thing where people say, oh, you know, if I don't get a high distinction, then I'm just going to throw myself in front of the bus. Don't do that. You know what? High distinctions, they should be as rare as hen's teeth for good reason. So you won't be getting many of those. Because when you do, you'll be really excited. Because if everyone got a high distinction, then I've got to invent something else which is beyond 100%. You know what? And this is quite important, because I've done this quite a lot when I hand people back their assignment, and they might get a high credit, and I'm thinking, well, that's all right. And they go, oh, I'm devastated. I only got a credit. And I'm going, listen to the language. Credit. That's a positive thing. There's absolutely no shame in getting a credit. So this sweet spot of from credit to distinction, you're meant to be a student. You know, you're meant to be finding your way. You're meant to be making mistakes and discoveries. Mistakes is where all the value is. So don't be afraid of, you know, if you get a distinction, don't be shattered by that. You know, it's okay. Bo's obviously dropping in and out up there in the country. Obviously a cow tripped over the internet cable. Right, so I know I've been on about this. Okay. Back again. Excellent. Now, the second stage is literally an advancement from the first stage. You've received some feedback. We've had a discussion, possibly, and now you're working up your draft. You'll notice that the first assignment, I give a word count. I don't really go a lot by word counts because I find that they're quite arbitrary. I'd rather really good words, all in the right order with all of the grammar and punctuation, than just 1,000 random words. Like, you know, copy and paste lorem ipsum in there. It's like ridiculous. But the first assignment's about 1,000 words. Gives you a measure of how much we're after. The second one is about 1,000 words. All that really means is they're about the same amount of work. The third assignment says 2,000 words. I'm not after 4,000 words. The third assignment really is just a final polish. So hopefully what I've done is I've created what we call in education a nice learning ramp rather than big sort of steps. If you think about steps, right, you might have got the highest place and the lowest place, but you've got these steps, which, you know, each step is a bit of a challenge. What I've tried to do is create a nice ramp so I don't freak you out. So you're going to get all of the same learning outcomes. You're going to do, you're going to get to the same place, but it's not going to hurt as much. Cool. Any thoughts, questions, observations, or just general lack of clarity?
I have a question in regards to the assignments, and I forgot to ask it yesterday in critical thinking. But what is your reference preferencing? I'm not entirely sure if that's the right way to put that.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you.
Look, in academia, we love a referencing thing. What I like to see, and I like to see it because it's good habits, is that you start to understand Harvard referencing. Everyone uses Harvard referencing, and it basically means that you are telling me where you got stuff from.
Okay. I'm
So
not
when
familiar with it, but I'll look it up.
There's, you know Elliot that you met this morning?
Yes.
He's the guy.
Okay. I'll just ask him more questions next week. I'm sure he'll be thrilled.
That's what he's there for. He's mad for it. The other thing is, we've got a thing called Studiosity. I mentioned it in the orientation. Yep. You can throw your assignment into Studiosity before you send it to me.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad thing to do. And also, I've got a guy in the second stage of the course, and he sends me multiple drafts. Drives me insane. Love it. It's totally annoying. So I tend to sort of be I tend to sort of do a thing like spend my evenings watching, I don't know, sport or something, or a film or something, with my laptop on my lap. And so I just sort of try and stay on top of there'll always be a draft from this guy for his assignment. And I go, oh, God. But I love the fact that he seeks feedback. And I'm quite open to him. I say to him, it drives me mental that you're doing this because you're making me work. But it's good. Make me work. Make me earn the millions of dollars that they pay me each week. So, yeah. I mean, that's what we're here for. So I always try and get back to you. And if you send me drafts, that's good. But I'll also say, have you thrown this through Studiosity? And you can ask Elliot all about referencing. And so if you found something, just tell me where you got it from. And there's a sort of there's a protocol where you've got a chapter and you go, blah 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 blah. And I imagine you're going to get a lot of it from the internet.
So it's not as complicated as like Chicago 16th or APA or anything like that?
Who would know? I don't know. I've only ever come across Harvard, and we use a particular version of it. Academics are mad for that stuff. I just like to see it. I'm never going to necessarily go and check it, but I think at this stage in your academic life, it's good that you're using it, because if you go much further down the academic path, referencing becomes really common. So if you go off and do your masters, for instance, you're going to be expected, or even in your second year, referencing is a solid thing, that it just shows you've got some academic rigor around things. So it's pretty important.
Okay, thank you.
This is a good reference. I don't know if you guys subscribe to Cinefx. Look at this, it's printed, it's got pictures and everything. This is the industry publication for this stuff. I stupidly took out a hardback subscription, thinking that would give me access to their online stuff. Apparently not. You either got the printed one, or you've got the online stuff, because all of this is obviously online. Because I was thinking, oh, can I go? No, I just hit the paywall, so it's annoying. So, and it also takes forever to get here. So I'm only up to June this year. So like they just turn up periodically. So but they do have heaps and heaps of free stuff on their website. So I would suggest very strongly that you go and say whatever film that you're wanting to write about, or even if you don't know what to write about, go to the Cinefx website, see what's there, and if you find some really good resources, you think that film really interests me, because let's face it, there's going to be a film there that you think, oh, that's amazing, I haven't seen that, maybe I'm going to go and watch that. and then you know you've got the resources, and you can reference, you can say, I read this because these people interviewed the director and the visual effects supervisor and the lead animator and blah, blah, blah. So you've got all that really solid referencing there. It's not like I think blah, blah, blah. It's like I know because these people went and spoke to them. And that would be solid referencing. Cool. Okay, so, and then the final stage is the final report. So, you know, it's your research and clarity of communication is critical. So it's getting all of those sort of 2,000 words in the right kind of order. Yeah, so it's not a massive essay. It's just you get to spend kind of 11 or 12 weeks crafting it rather than 3 assignments which are a bit rushed. So I think that's, I'm kind of excited about seeing the quality of difference. All right, so here's, because we're visual people, I would imagine that your first assessment is just a really broad sketch of the whole pipeline. You know, it's, don't kind of start at the beginning and just work your way through. It's, you know, like a you know, the first paragraph is complete and finished, and then you just move on from there. The first sentence is perfect, and you just keep stitching onto it, like knitting onto it. Just work like wet clay. Just kind of just start roughing it in and sketching in the whole thing, and that way, when I get to see it, I can go, oh, this is really good, but you probably could have covered more points here, and you could have gone into more detail there. The second bit is you might be particularly interested in a particular area of the production. It might be a specific step or role. It might be previs, or it might be modeling, or whatever it is that interests you, and you don't have to commit. You can just, this is allowing you to investigate what aspect of the industry you might be interested in. You can go into a little bit more detail, but also a little bit more detail in the steps leading into it and the steps leading out of it. Hopefully my graphic indicates that the orange is a bit more sort of detail, and then the final is you sketch in a bit more detail. So that would be kind of one approach. We'll see how we go. You are all going to do something probably a little bit different. See how you go. Okay, so here's a clue. Pick a film that interests you from an animation or VFX perspective. Step 1. Investigate the making of that film. What steps along the pipeline are you drawn to? Animating, modeling, previs, VFX, I don't know. That's how I would approach it. Start off with something that interests you.
What's previs?
Oh, that previs, excellent. Previs is a really interesting aspect of film production. It basically happens right in the beginning, and I'm going to talk about it anyway, but it essentially means pre-visualization. So it's where all of the rough planning is sketched out. So it's kind of an area that a lot of people like to work in because it's really broad, and you work really closely with the director, and you're throwing around rough ideas, and there's a lot of cyclical creative loops, and you're using rough artwork, and you're making rough cuts of a film. They don't just start a film right at the beginning and go, right, opening sequence, film it, and then go on to the next sequence and film it. They work on it pretty much like that you start in a really broad, wet clay kind of way, so you plan out all the stages. And that's what previs is. It's a planning stage. And so they use rough artwork, and they use these things called animatics. Let's talk about that. because that's really what we're about. I'll get into that today.
Okay.
It's a really nice area. Okay, so this is my subject overview. Today we're going to talk about we're going to obviously the assessment briefing and an overview of CG animation, the visual effects pipelines, and steps and phases. Next week we go into a bit more depth, an overview of CG animation, VFX roles and responsibilities. And I can leave you to read through this, otherwise it's just madness just reading what's on the screen. But essentially, this is my plan. Everyone's going to come at this with different levels of experience. I mean, one of the students I had in the first time I ran this was terrifying, because he actually was already working in a production company doing VFX pipelines. So he knew this more than I did, which was terrifying, because the whole way through the lecture I thought he's going to pick me up, and he did. He picked me up on little details that I got wrong or got out of whack. He said, "Oh, well, that's an interesting point, Simon, but they don't do that anymore." I go, "Thanks for that, excellent." So we do learn as we go along, and that's one of the great things about teaching, is we're all learning together, and I love that. So there's no shame from my part. There's a huge amount of humility, which is a good thing. All right, let's get into the guts of this. So, what is a VFX pipeline? The word pipeline is a great metaphor for the whole animation and VFX film production model. It's a sequential system of processes that are at the same time disparate and not connected, yet they are interdependent. So all of those steps can work in isolation, but they're all joined together. And if anything works out of whack, it affects the whole production. AFX, animation visual effects, is essentially a team sport. So we need to know how to collaborate. And the important thing is that we all work together in a team efficiently to produce something that we couldn't easily do on our own. It's the idea of one person can't build a house on their own, but 10 people could build 20 houses working together. And that's a really important thing to mention, that some filmmakers, some artists sort of have to go and work on their own because they don't necessarily work in teams very well. They're just not wired that way. If you're going to work in and it's good to know how you work, because some people work really great in teams, and that can actually be their strength. I've seen fantastic designers that and animators and people I've worked with over the years that are so good at working in teams, whilst individually they're not that flash, but they're fantastic team players. And likewise, I've come across people that are amazing on their own, but they're horrible to work with because they just don't gel with people, and they're the person that you're always tripping over because they bring all this sort of ego and baggage with them. So it's how you work in a team is really critical. Team players are so important, and the ability to work in a team. Okay, what am I talking about? So it requires a vast team of people, all with specialist skills. The tasks that these team members complete need to be coordinated sequentially, otherwise time and essentially money gets wasted. It's the design of the pipeline that is critical. It's kind of the glue that brings it all together. And when you start reading any kind of literature or any kind of industry film reviews, they very often talk about the pipeline. They'll often talk about, we had to redesign the pipeline because we had these particular creative or technical challenges, or we were trying to achieve this particular creative vision from the director, and we realized our pipeline that we were using just needed to be redesigned because we we had all these bottlenecks and we couldn't overcome these technical challenges because our pipeline wasn't working. So they talk about this all the time, which is a perfect subject to start us off with. So in many ways, there's a similarity to any kind of production line. I've used the idea of the good old-fashioned car assembly line. The main difference is that there's a lot more what we call creative iteration processes and loops within the making of a feature film. A car is probably a little bit of a dry, terrifying model, because I don't think anyone really wants to work on a car production line. There's a lot of automation processes that reduce the repetition in the work that we do as animators. And there's also a lot more creativity, a lot more problem solving. That's where the creativity really is. That's where the technical meets the creative. And if you're wired like a technical, creative person who loves solving problems, this is the industry for you. And there's obviously a lot more variety because the tedium was mostly being automated out. So working on a production line can be very much like being a plumber without, all the block toilets. Or maybe that is a similarity. I don't know. But it's that. Trying to work out where in the production line problems are going to occur. Where will there be a blockage, or where will there be a leak? Where will there be a bottleneck where things sort of bunch up and there's frustration? Or where in the production line, in the pipeline, is there wastage? Where is there time and money being sort of leaked away? So there are actually roles in the industry of people that design pipelines, that design the workflow. They have this beautiful holistic view of systems. Some people are fantastic systems people, and they can sort of see the workflow in this really holistic way. They're really great. There's room for those sort of people. And they're fantastic at solving those problems. Asking, during the planning stage, asking questions. How many shots are there? How many artists are needed? What tasks need to be done? How long will it take to render? Where are the files being backed up? How are we managing our digital assets? What kind of custom software is required? Because there's a lot of off-the-shelf software that you're going to deal with, but there's a lot of digital integration and a lot of APIs that are essentially bits of software that help systems talk to each other, and all of that needs to be designed. What resources are needed? Is there a better way? Is there a simpler way? All of that stuff, all of this problem solving with the pipeline needs to be considered. And visualizing the pipeline as a flowchart helps view and anticipate those problems before they happen. Even in a way, I've been thinking a lot about our systems in the college. We almost need to have a production pipeline of when we first meet a student to when we graduate a student. They're probably, I sort of started thinking about those kinds of systems as the course grows and we get more students. There's sort of working out all those systems is really critical. Otherwise, if you don't anticipate, if you don't have someone who can think systematically, you tend to have breakdowns or blockages, and it can be quite problematic. You end up with kind of a thing that looks like this little tangle. You don't know where anything's going. Okay, the purpose of a pipeline. We all know that the film industry is incredibly lucrative, and it always has been. I'm reading a fascinating book about Buster Keaton at the moment, and Buster Keaton was as you all know, it's a silent film star from the 1920s, in the sort of silent period of film. And I was absolutely astonished. I was reading recently the kinds of money that they were making in the film industry in the 1920s was pretty much like owning your own oil well. Like, it was absolutely ridiculous. Far exceeding the kinds of profits that we're making now. But we all know that feature films make a lot of money. However, see, back in the 1920s, every feature film made a lot of money. There were no failures. The thing is, between 65 and 75% of movies lose money. Only between 14 and 20% even break even. And only 5 to 10% make a profit. That really shocked me. I had no idea. Were you guys aware of that?
No.
Nah. Yeah, that is pretty shocking.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when they do make a profit, they make an absolute bucket load. And that's the thing. So there's a lot of speculation in so much as sometimes films, they'll make a film and it doesn't do so well. They'll get their money back eventually, so they'll syndicate it to, a streaming service, or they'll sell it to various networks. So eventually they'll get their money back, but they don't, they often talk about that box office thing of like making their money back in the first week. So this is really at the crux of why we have a pipeline. So it's to control costs and to increase efficiency. Studios move production from countries and states that offer tax incentives. So, for instance, in Adelaide at the moment, there's an absolute boom in film production. Hollywood, high-end, blockbuster film production. There's an absolute stack of it happening in little, humble old Adelaide. And everyone's like, really? Why is that? And the reason being is the South Australian government has been really quite smart. It's done some really good deals with offering tax incentives to production companies. There's production companies like Rising Sun and Mill Film and Technicolor, and essentially what those film companies do is they get the contract to complete aspects of films for generally American film companies. And this idea of a pipeline, not only is it a pipeline, a sequence of processes that happen, but that pipeline is spread around the world globally, which means that a production doesn't shut down at the end of the day. Back in my day when I worked in the film industry, pretty much we started in the morning, you worked really hard, and you got till 8, 9 o'clock at night often, and sort of it just shut down. People started drifting out the office from about 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and it just shut down. It started again 9 o'clock in the morning. Everyone walks in, gets a coffee, starts working again. That doesn't happen anymore because the production pipelines are global, and they do that to cut costs and for efficiency. Because obviously, if they can get work done on a global scale for cheaper, they're going to do it. That's why places like Australia are really well placed, because we sit in that time zone that it means that work can flow in and flow out of Australia. And so You know, the Americans like it because we're kind of a bit like them. You know, we're sort of a bit British and we're a bit American, and we speak the same language, we've got lots of the same cultural values, so they kind of get us, and that's where they really like working with Australians. They know that they've they've got good production standards. So let me just read through my notes. So yeah, it's that idea of that on a global production pipeline, the sun never sets. That there's always something happening. There's always a task that's getting passed along the line. And so this disparate nature of the global workforce, offshoring requires studios to create really robust production lines. So it means that all of those studios are talking to each other. If you go to the websites of anyone, like, you know, there's Method here in Melbourne, and you go to their website and they'll proudly display that they've got offices all around the world, and they just literally just string from time zone to time zone, and which means that they've got that really efficient pipeline, that things are just constantly moving. So you're working on an international scale. But just as an offshoot here, I've just put this idea of the kinds of money that productions are making. You know, that it's, yes, a blockbuster film might cost $400 million, but you know, this is the sort of profit they can make. You know, Pirates of the Caribbean, made on the Gold Coast, made $1 billion profit. You know, so there's a lot of money to be made, but that's why the pipeline exists for efficiency. Here's a little article on Rising Sun Pictures in Adelaide. So I knew that was a reason why I put that there. You get these slides later, so you can read through this and click through on the links if you like and see, you know, what's happening. So we're going through a bit of a golden period at the moment. There's probably never been more work around in this industry. Certainly in my professional career, I've never seen this level of work around. So there's absolutely jobs there, and the reason being is it's streaming services have essentially created a turf war for content. You know, there's YouTube is getting in on the act of becoming a streaming service. Yes, you know, it's, you know, started off with, you know, cats playing pianos, and now they're commissioning content. So, you know, there's so many global players that are wanting art custom, and the thing is, once you've seen a film or once you've seen a series, you kind of go, you sort of don't go and watch it a second time. So there's this global hunger for production, and so there are lots of production happening on a global scale. A lot of it is happening in Australia, which is a great thing. There's a lot of work around. Okay, so film production is not just about a creative process, but it's also a technical one. So there's a lot of technical problem solving. The pipeline doesn't just enable processes to trickle downstream from conception through production to the completion phase and the compositing, but it allows the whole team to see the complete picture, and the whole thing gets worked on all at the same time. And there's lots of these little tiny iterative creative loops. So where possible, time-consuming processes should not be placed in the middle of creative loops, because creative loops need to have that trial and error and go back and start again and rework things. And so if you've got a really time-consuming process right in the middle of something, it holds things up. So for an example, do you guys know what an animatic is? Have you heard the term animatic?
No.
I've heard of Animaniacs, but that's a cartoon.
Animaniacs?
So
Okay. In a nutshell, when when you make a film, generally speaking, that you need an idea, and then you have a script, and then the script people will then work with a team of people that work in storyboards. So essentially, they'll create really rough drawings to rough out the scenes. Quite often, the drawings don't even look as good as this one. This is a Jamie Hewlett one for Gorillas. They're often, like, he's a phenomenal cartoonist, and he's got this very quick, expedient style. But then the animatics I've seen in advertising and film production, sometimes you look at these drawings going, what on earth is that? I have no idea what that is. But the reason they work really quickly is they can rough out ideas to see if they work sequentially. There's no point having an idea and making this beautiful drawing with, you know, all of the detail and the shading and, you know, getting it all right. When it's, you know, you just go, oh, that scene just doesn't work in there. We've spent, you know, 2 days making that drawing, and then we just tear it off the wall and rip it up. So that's what I mean by really rapid iterative processes. So once you've got the storyboard roughed out, and you do a really rough draft, and if you go think, oh, I think this is working, then you might spend a bit more time on the drawing. What you then do is you film the drawings, you scan the drawings, or they might even be created digitally, and then they're cut into effectively a rough edit of the film. So they'll have rough sound, they'll have rough actors, they'll get, you know, they'll just work it out, you know, it might not even be the actor that's cast in the role, or the voice talent that's cast in the role. They'll just get somebody, you know, around the office to speak the lines, so that they can start just nutting it out and seeing how it works. There's no point spending ages on sound recording or all of that stuff that takes time-consuming craft. You just rough it out, and that's what I mean by not putting a time-consuming process in the middle of the pipeline. So everything is just roughed out, and they have this cyclical kind of iterative process that I talk on. So it's constant reworking, trial and error, trying things, and, you know, so there's no reduced, you know, there's no wasted effort in crafting something that gets thrown away. And trust me, I've worked on film productions where I've seen people work on things and put in the nth amount of detail and effort into something which actually got cropped off and was off the scene. So they're working away on something in the corner, and it just didn't get framed up. And so it's just heartbreaking, and just, yeah, I've seen that happen a lot. So the animatic storyboard is a really good example of that. And if you want to know a little bit more about animatic storyboards, I've got a couple of YouTube links here for these Gorillas film clips. Essentially, it's the Gorillas film clip shot as an animatic, and then you can go and see the final version. And it's really interesting to see the animatic versus the original. So I often put in heaps of little links all through my slides, so make sure you go and have a look at that. I don't know if anyone ever does. I'm intrigued. I put this stuff there for you to look at, so hopefully you do go and engage with it. So essentially, this is what a schematic of a pipeline looks like. So we've got the phases: conception, production, completion, or another word for that is the phases: pre-production, production, post-production, and then there's all of these. And there's multiple. I mean, this is highly simplified, and I've got lots of these kind of diagrams that I'll show you. You know, planning, research and development. They bring in the technical directors to work out whether they can actually, you know, how they're going to solve these problems. Then, you know, there might be some previs in here. Then we get, I think I'll put previs down here. Concept development, storyboarding, layout production, modelers, VFX supervisors, riggers, animators, texturers, motion capture, match moving, principal photography. Then we get into the post-production, scene prep, motion tracking, matte painting, lighting, rendering, keying, color. There's just stacks and stacks of these roles. So the course of this subject is just to show you how they're all fitted together, introduce you to these terms so that you can have a roadmap of how these film factories work. Okay, so the idea of media is just getting closer and closer. And so games used to be very, very different, a very, very different beast to film production. But these days, games and films, all it is just, it's narrative, it's storytelling. The only difference is that with a film, it's a lineal narrative. You know where you're going, and a game tends to have a multiple outcomes that are essentially determined by gameplay. So you don't really know where you don't really know where you're going to go. That's the main difference. They rely on very similar technologies. They use a lot of the same tools. They all use Maya and all of the things for building assets, texturing, animation, lighting, creating particle effects, post-production. All of that stuff really, really similar. But their pipelines are very, very different. So they look quite similar, but the way it all fits together is very, very different. So, like I said, film is a very clear linear narrative with very little user interaction, and games tends to, the player is more in control of the narrative journey. For film, the biggest challenge for the pipeline is the management of massive amounts of digital data. There's whole teams of people that literally manage the digital assets that are generated on a constant flow of backing it up and also knowing where everything goes. Film productions have been known to collapse because the digital data hasn't been secured. There's a famous story about when they made Toy Story that basically of about a year into the production, they effectively lost everything, and they were about to start again. And there was this person who just piped up and said, "Actually, I made a backup because I went to work off-site at home, and I've got a lot of the assets." And they went, "What? Fantastic!" So they're able to salvage Toy Story. It's a fantastic story about how they're able to do that. But these days they don't. That was back in the early days when the digital world was still evolving. It certainly doesn't happen now. So thousands of individual assets assembled to create realistic and believable renders, and many terabytes of data are generated and passed around these global teams around the production line. So it's really important that they manage all of that stuff. Game production cycles run for 1 to 4 years, just of the complexity of designing a game, testing gameplay, all of those types of processes. However, films are under a lot more pressure to turn a production around between 6 and 12 months, mostly because they know they've just got one path to work through. But it's a much more kind of polished product. Game production, multiple destinations, the artwork generally not as polished. It's got a different look and feel. But on the other hand, there's all of these contributing factors because you don't know where the player's going to go. So There's a lot more considerations. So just have a quick squiz my notes. So in film, creative teams are generally larger and run across global time zones, 24-hour production schedules. As a result, the production processes must be very efficient and as very, very nimble to respond to in an agile manner, because all of a sudden there might be a sudden directorial change, or there might be some decision that's made at a higher level, which means that the production needs to be able to work and respond in a very nimble way. Creative direction, technical challenges, production schedule, all of this stuff can change. Film pipelines cope with vast quantities of data and need to be flexible over a short and intense time schedule. In contrast, video games, whilst the production teams make broad kind of underlying decisions around gameplay and around, you know, what the visual and the audio style might look, ultimately it's the audience that decides how the content and the narrative plays out. So this requires input data from, you know, whether it's what kind of device they're working on, whether it's, you know, they've got you know, that's the other thing, is when someone's watching a movie, they're sitting in a seat you know, they're either sitting in front of a television screen or they're in a theatre. The thing is about games is there's always these different platforms that are always evolving and seem to be changing all the time. So that's, you know, there's those kinds of technical challenges that really kind of affect how the technical part of the pipeline works. So the processing must be done in real time. All of these elements that make up a game, like the 2D and the 3D elements, the lighting, the effects, the physics, and the audio, all need to be stitched together with code, which means that that interactive experience is seamless. It's a very different way of working things out, because there's always the player, the characters come to a default position to run or jump or shoot or pick something up or whatever they're doing. So it's a very different mindset. The asset creation tools are initially very similar, but the differences lay in the output pipeline. Typically smaller chunks of data that can be run together in, you know, multiple nimble combinations. Film animators will create long and, you know, highly polished sequence of motions, where games animators create libraries that fit together like jigsaw puzzles. And so the way all of the motion fits together, as I was alluding before, is very different. Essentially, the art and the craft of a games artist is to be the master of economy. I've worked in both areas. I used to work in computer games, right in sort of kind of in the kind of the golden age in the 90s, and it was very, very different. So we were always thinking about economy and how things fit together. Platforms that run games is fixed. I think I've covered this. You know, the story is linear, and games on the other hand don't have fixed standards of output. In addition, there might be, you know, other sort of outputs like rumble or force feedback type controllers. And different, obviously, you know, it varies from different kinds of games. You know, real-time strategy games or first-person role-play games. They all bring in their own complexities, and games artists and film artists don't really cross over that much. However, that's all sort of starting to change. VR's making major inroads into that. And the thing is, none of this stuff is static. It's only sort of true at this moment in time. Okay, pre-production, it all starts with an idea. Without an idea, you don't really have anything. So we'll assume that there's been a script that's been developed, and then we might have at least a rough storyboard. And this is where the production really starts to take shape, the look and feel. So pre-production is all about planning. Failing to plan is planning on failing, as they say. Step one is all about research and development, basically asking lots and lots and lots of questions and trying to sort of anticipate problems before they even become problems. These days, it's working out what is real and what needs to be created digitally, and more this day and age, that almost nothing in film is real anymore. Like almost everything is created digitally, and there's a lot more green screen that's being used. So digital elements are becoming the norm, not the exception. What kinds of models need to be made? What sort of assets are needed? What kind of levels of detail? How complex are the scenes? What kind of visual effects are needed? If there's some live action film, will there be special effects? Special effects are different from visual effects. Special effects are things like smoke, things that happen on set, where visual effects are the digital equivalent of it. Will special software need to be developed? What skills need to be built up? Do we need to train animators? Is there a new piece of software coming in? So we need different kinds of modeling skills. Is there something affecting how the VFX is produced? So all of this stuff needs to be planned out. So these are all, I'm just dropping in lots of terms here that are going to sort of appear hopefully in your assignment. So we're just introducing you to this stuff. So if it's all new and sort of slightly skidding off your brain, that's okay. It's kind of meant to. Step two is about concept, art and design. So this is more probably what you thought filmmaking was more about, where it's about the creative direction of a production. Step three is more about pre-visualization, or what we call blocking in the art. And it literally means sometimes it might be using just three-dimensional blocks, which are stand-in art. So that's the idea of not going to a lot of detail to make something. Sometimes it might be a simple polygon with a picture textured onto it. So say you've got a car going past, you don't spend time animating or modeling the car and animating it. They would literally get almost like a digital shoebox, and they literally take a photograph of a car, slap it on both sides, slap it on the top, slap it on the front, and it literally it's like a shoebox with a photograph of a car on it. And they just go, oh well, car goes from here to there, and you just go whiz. And that is what previs is about. It's blocking. That's why they call it blocking. Blocking in animation, just really rough stuff. Because if it doesn't work, then you go back into a feedback loop, a creative loop, to go, oh well, I like that car, but actually, could you make it blue? Okay, we'll make it blue really, really quickly. Or I didn't like that style of car, I want another kind of car. That sort of stuff. The production phase. This is where the production phase is actually where things can happen live on set. Up until this point, almost, with the pre-production, this is where everything is planned out. The production phase is actually where you might end up on a sound stage, where you might actually have actors and things that are starting to get real. And so there's lots of steps involved here. So that might be, there's a lot of pre-prep on the sound stage. So I'm just tripping over myself a little bit there. Trying not to keep it quite simple. So there might be things like, prepping scenes for rotoscoping, or we're going to get into terms like match moving and motion tracking and taking principal photography on set. I'm just introducing you to these steps, and I know I'm just throwing terms at you. and dropping these roles in, so that eventually it will build up a much bigger picture. So just layering information. Then on set you might have a visual effects supervisor who's ultimately going to work in the digital realm, but they need to be present on the sound stage to supervise what's happening, so they'll have a really much better understanding of what needs to be produced digitally, so that the digital elements and the real practical elements blend together. The pre-production phase is where all of these things come together, all of the stuff that's shot on camera live and all of the stuff that's produced digitally start to blend together. So there's going to be lots of scene prep and lots of steps that start to overlap. Elements filmed live on set are prepared through a range of processes such as match moving and motion tracking, actors that are chroma keyed, green screened, are composited into backgrounds. The information that the VFX supervisor has gathered on set is used, things like using high dynamic range images, HDR images taken during the shot, using lens charts and color charts and reflective chrome balls, are all used to gather information so the compositors can do their job. Digital assets that are created by modelers, animators are brought in. Then there might be some matte painting assets composited with digital live action footage. Compositing is almost the final stage, where it's all of these disparate elements are brought together in a way that looks believable, because that's what filmmaking is about. It's making the thing that isn't believable believable. Storytelling. If you don't believe it, the story's ruined. So ultimately, that's where all the craft comes in. That's a lot of stuff. Apologies for all the terminology. It will start to gel together. So next week, I'm going to go through a few more of the stages of the production phases in a little bit more detail. So all of those roles that I just kind of peppered you with tonight will start to come together, and you'll start to understand where all these roles and bits and pieces fit together. I've got a question for you though. How much do you, just for my own level, and this is not a kind of a showing off exercise, but how much do you guys already know? What's your sort of your knowledge level? Go on, Cindy, you start.
I always start though. Ugh.
I know, but I picked on you because you're the chattiest. It's teacher craft, you see, because, sorry, but you're the...
It's fine. As I said, surname begins with A, so always at the top of the list anyway.
Same.
So I mentioned before that I was a bit, feeling a bit out of place because my focus is mainly in step 2, which is the concept design and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
So I know quite a bit when it comes to like thumbnailing and design, and then people going, yeah, I want this to be a different color and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know anything about 3D modeling. Like this morning, I was a bit overwhelmed, but apparently I didn't do too bad. I just
You'll be fine.
took it off straight. Yeah. So that's what I know. As it comes to production stuff, I probably don't know as much as I need to. So
good.
Yeah.
You're not meant to arrive knowing everything.
No, that's why we're here.
I've been around this stuff for years, and I've got so many disparate interests. I constantly feel like I'm always the beginner, and I think there's something really, really important about having the beginner's mind.
Yeah.
I think having a beginner's mind is a fantastic place to be.
Because of all the questions?
It means that you have this lovely naivety where you don't know what isn't possible. it's to maintain the beginner's mind.
Okay.
Get all philosophical on you.
In that case, you'll love me.
Fantastic.
In this particular area, I'm something of a blank slate, but also a bit of a sponge when it comes to information.
Brilliant.
My background's more in music, but this is something I've always wanted to do. So
Great.
it's had a thing. If I set my mind to it, it's definitely going to happen. So I'm here to learn.
Awesome. I'm here to learn too. That's the great thing about teaching is often you don't know a great deal about something. You sort of vaguely do, and you go, oh, you're having to just expand your knowledge into this area, which is great. And that's the beautiful thing about teaching. In fact, the worst thing to teach is something you know a lot. And the worst teachers are the ones that know a lot about things. And there's, in my years as a teacher, various aspects of design, I've ended up with deep knowledge in certain areas, and they actually became the things that I disliked teaching the most.
Not to be nitpicky, isn't that kind of contradictory with what we're doing with CG then?
What's that? Sorry?
Well, they're professionals, so they know a lot about what they're teaching. So it kind of contradicts what you just said about the worst teachers are the ones that know a lot about what they're teaching. Yeah,
I know. I'm just full of contradictions. It's when you have a deep knowledge of something, it's you assume everyone else has that deep knowledge. For instance, the best person to teach a piece of software is someone who's just learned it. So, for instance, I've got a guy that used to be an ex-student of mine elsewhere, and we needed someone to teach a particular piece of software, not on my course, it was actually in someone else's course. And because somebody dropped out at the last minute. And I spoke to this guy, and I said, I know that you're really good at learning software. I know you're really good with, things like Maya and texturing, and he's all over that sort of stuff. And I said, how's your After Effects? He said, yeah, I've used it a bit, but, I'm not that good. I went, great. Do you want to teach it in about a month's time? He went, what? And do you know what? He was the best teacher at After Effects because he knew where all the pain points were, and he was excited about the new concepts. Whereas if you've been using it forever, what you consider just common knowledge isn't actually common knowledge, and you forget where all the potholes are. So you're much better off. Like if I was to teach, I know Photoshop really well. And when I first started teaching Photoshop, I used to get really, really excited about nitty-gritty details about it. These days I just go, Photoshop, yeah, just use it. I don't know. I've got no interest in teaching Photoshop, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense, because I don't think I probably ever got taught Photoshop, but what I do know of Photoshop is mostly from personal or self-taught experience.
Yeah, I think most people are these days. Scott, how are you?
Oh, not too bad.
So tell me, what's your sort of skill level? Like I said, I would much rather people go, you know what, I know nothing about this stuff. I breathe a sigh of relief, because when I'm talking about this stuff, I go, am I telling you the obvious stuff, or are you completely lost?
Well, with in relation to like the pipeline and stuff, I'm self-taught, so like I know a little bit about the modeling side of things, but the rest of the pipeline I'm pretty clueless about.
And that's okay. You're not going to be an expert in every single part of the pipeline.
Yeah, exactly.
What the purpose of this subject is to map out what the production line looks like, why it exists, how it changes, so that when you will be working in a VFX pipeline, and you'll kind of have a broad understanding, vaguely, like compositing happens there, and that's what match moving is, and that's what rotoscoping is, and that's what a VFX supervisor is, and that's why they're taking reference photographs on set. Or
yeah.
so there's so many components to it. So it's completely fine. It's just it puts my mind at rest that I'm not sitting here with someone who's a complete expert. Like I said, my first class, first time running through this subject, I was a bit sort of bit wobbly with it. I was still like sort of bedding some of the principles down. And of course, my first student knows this stuff inside out, back to front. Absolutely terrifying. Lewis, how are you?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the pipeline.
Perfect.
I've not a little bit because I did a diploma of screen and media, but yeah, that's
Love it. Perfect.
it's a very limited sort of basic sort of outline of things. No sort of specific areas. I did do an assignment on motion capture.
Oh yeah.
I did an assignment on Avatar and how they did the facial motion capture.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I've just sort of been trying to think of a movie. So in regards to the assessment,
yep.
Were you saying that we have to choose a film that we sort of interested in? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, look, well, it makes sort of sense, because if I said, oh, you've got to go and do it on this movie, and you go, oh, it's really not my bag, you know, really boring. I don't want to watch that, or I'm not interested in that genre. It just makes it a lot more enjoyable and more valuable if it interests you in some way. But you know, that said, later on in this subject, I basically do a VFX pipeline or breakdown on a movie that I knew nothing about, and it wasn't really in my kind of wheelhouse of interests, which was not the last Spider-Man movie, the one before that had that more drawn style, and I knew nothing about it, and it wasn't really like I'm not really much of a Marvel head. But the deeper I got into it, I got really fascinated by the style of animation and some of the technical challenges they had to work through. So I started off with minimal interest, and I became really fascinated by that. So that can happen too, you know. And you know, inversely, there might be a movie that you really love, and you sort of break your interest in it by delving into it too much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll have to give it a bit more thought. And
yeah, because you're going to be living in this assignment for 11 weeks. And ultimately, I just want you to it gives you a reason to swim around in the information and swim around in the kind of the process.
Yeah.
And I found all of the assignments that I've read so far, albeit they've been slightly different. Like I said, I've taken assessment 3 and just stretched it over the whole lot. I think it's a much better idea. It just means that you can just go into, you've got more time to think about it and go into a little bit, not so much more depth, but with a bit more polish. Because previously people only had like 2 or 3 weeks to do it. Now you've got more time. And it's going to ultimately, it's going to free you up with your modeling and your animation. That is my key. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give you more time to spend probably on doing the things that you're here to do.
Yeah. So at basically, so when was assessment 2? That's due what, week 9 or 10, is it? Or assessment 2?
Going back, because I do have a head like a sieve. Week 7. So week 1 is literally week 1. It's in week 3. Don't freak out about that. Just start with an idea. You know?
Yeah.
And the reason being is it's this thing, right? That if I said to you, there's one assessment, it's due in week 11, you would wait because you're a human being. I can tell. You would wait until week 10 and then lose your bundle and freak out because we all procrastinate. I procrastinate. Everyone procrastinates because I'm forcing you to start it. So by week 3, you're going to go, crap. Like, I doubt you're going to go and start on it tonight. But probably by the end of week 2, you're going to go, I've got an assignment due. And, you know, you'll put something hold, you'll knuckle down, it'll be, you know, Sunday, and you go, right, can't go to that barbecue, whatever it is. I've got to knuckle down my assignment. And you'll just sketch it out, and you'll start unpicking the problem. You'll go and watch a movie. You go, oh, all right, what has Cinefx got anything on that? You'll start Googling terms like VFX breakdown, avatar, whatever. And you'll start to find information, and you'll find some YouTube clips, and you'll find bits and pieces, and you'll just rough it out. That's all I want you to do, is start it. It's not meant to be polished. All it is a starting place so that I know you've started it. That's it. Assessment 2, that's kind of like you've had it, you've done it, I've turned the marking around, you've got a bit of feedback, you've thought about it a bit more, and then you can knock out a rough draft. And then I have a look at that. And then there's a whole bloody another, you know, was it 8, 9, 10, another 3 or 4 weeks, and then you've just got to polish it. It's easy.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Honestly, I've really taken the heat out of these assessments. I'm really pleased about it because I think in previous trimesters I was breaking my students, and that gave me a little bit of anxiety because I don't want to. I want this to be fun for you. I don't want to break you, especially in trimester 1. I'll break you in maybe trimester 6.
All right. Yeah. No, that's cool.
I want you to enjoy the modelling and the animation, and just patch this out.
Yeah. No, sweet.
You know, because I'm assuming that you've signed up to do a Bachelor of Animation and Visual Effects, and you don't really want to spend too much time writing essays.
Yep.
That's my point.
Yeah.
So in theory, VFX Pipeline is meant to be the same weight as modelling and the same weight academically as animation. Really? Nah, I don't think it is. It's meant to be on paper. So if you know the people from Texa come in, we go, oh yeah, it's the same amount of work. Yeah. Nah. You know, really, you're going to spend much more time animating and modelling and getting your hands dirty on the tools and learning software. Like Maya is massively complex. You know, it's really hard.
Yeah. No, it's from the little that I've done with you know, 3D software and that, it's very time consuming.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I understand that completely.
And I know I've said this many times, but it's always heartbreaking for me personally when it goes wrong, is keep your eye on sensor state. Sensor state is there so that if your world capsizes for whatever reason, and there's multiple reasons why that can happen. Trust me, I've been teaching a very, very long time, so I've seen every possible scenario. You can pull out and make it from. You can pull out from a subject, or if, I don't know, whatever. You can make any kind of adjustment to your course by the end of week 3. What's really heartbreaking, and again, I've seen every scenario, is Monday of week 4, I get an email from someone saying, is it too late to pull out because I've got this big thing that's just happened and I'm just a bit overwhelmed? And I just go, oh no. And I've just got no way to move with that. I've just got to go, is there, and I hate having that conversation where people have got, I'm trying to do 4 subjects, and I've got a full-time job and a family and blah, 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 and I've just bitten off more than I can chew. And I go, okay, which subject are you doing best? And I go, I'm doing this one. Okay, all right, let's keep that one. Which subject are you doing worst in? You go, oh, I'm doing this one, or let's kill that one. Let's worry about it later. But you've already paid for it. And so that's 3 subjects. Will that work? And I go, still a bit too much to say. All right, what's the next one that's giving you the most trouble? You go, that one. All right, so you've paid for that and you've failed that. It's a terrible situation. So I'm really mindful. No shame in reducing your study load. Okay, so if it's just getting too much for you, no shame in that at all. So just make sure you keep your eye on sensor state. It's personally, I find it heartbreaking when people go past. Okay, so I don't know very much about you guys yet, so I don't know what kind of busy lives you've got. And you can always call me. You've got my number. It's my student phone here. Call me, text me, whatever you need to do. And if you need a chat, whatever, if I can't answer, if I can't talk there and then, I'll come back to you or I'll get back to you. I watch my emails a lot, so there should be no reason why you can't get hold of me. Okay, so if you ever need to chat about your study load or anything, so just put it in your diary, sensor state. Bo, how are you going?
Other than my internet playing up a little bit tonight, we're good. Good.
Cool. I was going to ask you a question. I think I was intrigued when you said you had a music background.
Yes. No, I played in bands for on and off for the last 20-something years.
Cool.
How old am I now? Yeah, 15 years. But yeah, no, I really appreciate what makes up, primarily I'm looking at going into modeling and animating for the gaming industry.
Yep.
But what actually makes up a good game, and when you've got something that's just a full package, from the animation styling to the obviously a lot of well thought out stories to a really good soundtrack. It's just really good to have that at least a bit of musical knowledge to really appreciate a different aspect of film and games as well.
I think there's something about musicians that have a sense of that other dimension, which is time. And I know as an animator, because you have to sort of time stuff out, and you think, I need this action to happen from this moment to this moment. I know I kind of think in beats, that scenes have a rhythm to them, and it's like, okay, a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E, and there's a rhythm to it. And for me, that was instinctive as a musician to be able to. And sometimes I'd see animators that really struggled with timing, and you'd look at their work and you go, it's sort of, there's no reason for that happening there. It's not an obvious thing, because I used to start off with old-fashioned dope sheets, which were just sheets of paper with time. It's basically a map of time, and I would kind of like feel it out, and I go right, and almost like with an internal metronome, kind of know when the beats of the action need to happen. So yeah, you'll find that your musical stuff will kick in.
No, it's good. I know what you mean, but it'll be good to put it into practice.
Yeah. Well, no rush. Early days. What was I going to say? I meant to start making notes. You guys know about the Facebook group that we kind of run? I don't know if you use the kids love this social media, you know? They're all on it.
I hate it, but I think I've joined the group or something.
What I'm finding these days, I'm finding people say to me, I don't like Facebook. The reason I started the group, and there's no obligation. I know some people feel different ways about social media and how they use it, but it just seemed to be an easy way to communicate en masse with people. I know, and literally it's just a place where I post things and I find stuff, and I'm in various networks of things, and it's like I find something, oh, that's really interesting, I can throw it on there, and I know that instantly, half the group's seen it and watched it. So it's great if you can interact. You find the other members of the group on there, and just to get involved, and post things, comment on the comment on stuff. It's the only way I've found really effective way of interacting with everyone really, really quickly. And it just seems to work. There's discussion boards, but my experience of discussion boards are this, that I come up with because I'm supposed to put a thing in the discussion forum. And so for the first few weeks of trimester, I get really excited about it. I'm like, I'll ask you this question and get you to do this. And then I find like no one does anything, and I go, oh, that's annoying. So it sort of peters off. Maybe there's a sort of a correlation between your assessment stress and your discussion forum activities go like that. But Facebook's something you can do just while you're, I don't know, sitting on the toilet or something. I don't know. We know it happens. Cool. All right. Stop the share. I do this thing where I pause the recording, and all of a sudden everyone gets really chatty. It's really funny. So I've got to pause the recording here.